Psychological aspects of graduate school. This is a super important subject to talk about, kind of difficult to talk about, but almost every graduate student feels stress, suffers from depression, anxiety, and many other things. And oftentimes we can feel alone. And sometimes it's a help just to know that almost everybody feels this way from time to time. There are ways to get help, there are ways to deal with it, and you don't need to feel alone. So here, what I want to do is talk about various things that I think are common for graduate students, and I can even share some of my personal experience. I think have suffered all of these from one time to another. So let's get into it. I have to start by making this disclaimer. I'm not trained in any of this. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I do electromagnetics, optics, 3D printing. So I'm not trained in this at all. One could say I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it is an important subject and I need to share at least my experiences. So I can't diagnose or treat mental health. If you're suffering from something, I am not going to be able to help you. I highly encourage you to seek professional help. Go see your counseling center, or if nothing else, just your friends. You can get through everything in this video that I'm going to talk about. The first thing we'll talk about is something called imposter syndrome. And this is sort of like when you feel like you don't belong in the room, like everybody in that room is super smart. You don't belong there. You're doubting your skills, and it's only a matter of time before people discover that you don't know what you're talking about. And I should not laugh at this. I guess I could laugh because this is definitely something that is in my mind all the time. And interesting, what I found is before I went into the PhD or really knew much about it, I used to think these have got to be super confident people, super smart people, and they are super smart and awesome people. But very often those seeking the PhD are actually somewhat insecure about their level of knowledge, and they want to advance that so that they feel they have an expert level of knowledge about their topic. And that was counterintuitive to me. And the other thing is, if you are looking to feel like an expert, I'm not sure that will ever happen. I do not feel like an expert. Truly, inside, I do not feel like an expert, and I never call myself an expert. That's not true. When I write proposals, I am an expert. I am the world's foremost authority when I write proposals. But the reality is, I don't feel there is any such thing as experts. There's really only people that get stuff done anyway. PhD guilt. This is the guilt you feel when you're not actively doing your research or something toward it. Maybe our significant other, maybe our families, maybe people are helping us get through graduate school and we feel like, we're using their money or resources, or maybe you're just a super driven person and you feel that guilt. And this is very common and can cause stress and anxiety. But you need breaks. Even if you're on a roll, you're feeling good, but you've been working 2 or 3 hours, take a break. You have to put things aside to prevent you from getting to that point. My rule is that I tell my students, work as hard as you possibly can, such that you're still having fun and leading a healthy lifestyle. And if you do that and take breaks and just be at peace with you have to do this for your own mental sanity, I think you can deal with PhD guilt. Post PhD guilt. This is something quite different. This is when you graduate and you look back and you say to yourself, I think I could reproduce everything I did for my PhD in about 2 weeks. And then suddenly you feel kind of undeserving of that degree, almost like an imposter syndrome. I think these two are very related. But the point is, yes, you probably could repeat everything in about 2 weeks, but you have to ask yourself, how is it you can reproduce those things in 2 weeks? I bet you at the start of your research, you couldn't have reproduced those results in 2 weeks. You've gotten to that level of expertise and that level of knowledge and skill set such that you can reproduce it inside of 2 weeks. This is why companies are going to pay you more, because you can get these difficult things done in a much quicker amount of time than other people. So just recognize that as a very common feeling. And I would actually think the feeling you should have if you've really done your job. And you don't need to feel guilty about that. Significant others. Now, this isn't always a problem, but it is very often a problem. I might say 9 times out of 10. I really shouldn't offer numbers like that, but it seems like that to me. And graduate students struggle with their significant others, and this is especially true if that significant other is not also in graduate school or not doing that. And that's because when you're getting a PhD, you really have to bury yourself in it and spend just a ridiculous amount of time on that. I always define a PhD as an insane level of commitment to solving a problem. And so your significant others may look at that and feel like you're prioritizing your research over them. And then they feel like they're second important in your life. And so, or maybe it's not even your significant other, maybe it's your family. So your family or your significant other feels neglected, feels lonely. And these are things that you have to be aware of. And I wish I could offer you a magic bullet through it. I know it's not a problem for everybody, but I've even known couples where they were both in graduate school and understood this and still felt that way. So just keep in mind about your significant other. They are going to have very legitimate feelings. They may not understand what you're going through or why you're so committed to it. And deal with this early to try to prevent problems. Another source of stress and anxiety is your sort of path from the beginning to the end. And you lay out flow charts or people talk about it, and it really implies there's this linear path from the beginning to the end. And the reality is, this is your path to a PhD. It is going to take so many turns. Maybe you change topics, maybe equipment breaks down, and then you got to do something different, or you learn a new skill and then redo something, and so many other things. You might even change advisors or change universities. Who knows what would happen? And so when you deviate from this expected linear path, that can cause stress and anxiety. But a path like this through the PhD is much more the norm than the exception. So don't let things like that bother you. In fact, very often it can be a good thing. You might be working towards one particular topic and you make a discovery that's super exciting, and you decide to change the direction of your research so you can exploit that discovery. I see that as a very good thing and not anything to get stressed over. Very often when we start, we think our progress is going to look like this, that you're going to start and you're going to make mostly steady progress with some ups and downs, and maybe you look something like this. Well, in my experience, this almost never happens. Instead, I think this is much more typical of what a PhD looks like. So in the beginning, you're kind of making slow, steady progress. Maybe you're learning some soft skills. And at some point, you find yourself having mostly all of the skills you need to do your research. And then you take on the research, and that feels like a huge jump. And maybe you're even starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But then you get involved in your research, and you probably feel stuck, and you probably feel stagnated. And I think there's a good reason for that. I think almost by definition, research is stuck and stagnated, because if you make progress, that's development. And this is research and development. So research is stuck. When you make progress, that's development. And this can be very frustrating because you feel stuck. And think about it. To get a PhD, you have to make a fundamental discovery. You have to generate new knowledge. And that is tough because, well, most of the easy stuff has been done. And very often, at the third or fourth year, I'm not sure where it is, a lot of people start feeling burnout. And I think it's not even so much burnout, it's maybe more a feeling of hopelessness because you just feel stagnated and perhaps going backwards. But then it happens. You finally make this breakthrough, and it's a flurry of activity until the end. And everything seems glorious. You start writing your dissertation, and you're 90% done. But here's the thing psychologically. When you're 90% done, you're only halfway there. It's real easy to lose stamina at that 90% mark or think, oh, I'm just going to push a couple more weeks and I get things written. Whereas writing that dissertation is very tough and takes a lot of work. And I think best done in dribbles during your PhD rather than do the whole thing and then start writing at the very end. If you are writing the whole time, you actually could put it together in a relatively short amount of time. I've only ever had one student who did that, and he got his entire dissertation together in less than a month and didn't stress over it at all. He's much more the exception than the rule, though. Anyway, congratulations. If you get through that, you graduate. So what does it really take to get a PhD? And if you walk up to people on the street, every single one is going to say, you got to be really, really smart. It's not intelligence. I have never in my entire career or even heard of somebody not making it through their PhD because they weren't smart enough. Getting a PhD is all about stamina. If you've gotten to the level where you're pursuing the PhD, you're smart enough. A PhD just takes stamina. You got to stick with it. And very often people don't like focusing on such a narrow topic, but that's what it takes if you're going to make some fundamental contribution and generate new knowledge. So I have seen plenty of people fail simply because they didn't have the stamina to stick it out. Stress and anxiety, and this is probably one of the top things that plague graduate students because, well, lots of reasons. They're probably short on money. Maybe they've been working at this a long time. Maybe an experiment went wrong and they think their hypothesis might be wrong and they're just worrying about all of this stuff. And as I mentioned, I think people that seek a PhD, these aren't necessarily your super confident ones. It's, in fact, I think the opposite, where people pursuing the PhDs are the ones that recognize they need to learn more. And maybe that makes them a little bit more vulnerable to this sort of thing. So you really have to learn to deal with and manage stress and anxiety. I think a lot of that comes to learning your personal bandwidth, not overworking yourself, taking breaks. Even if you're going strong, you feel like you don't need a break, take a break anyway. In smartwatches these days, I just got one. It's constantly reminding me to get up and walk around, and I think that's great. And I actually feel better when I listen to my watch. It's easy for me if I don't have a reminder. I could sit there for hours and not even realize I've been sitting there hours, and suddenly I have to get up out of my chair, and oh my gosh, it hurts, my back hurts, and I can barely stand. You know, it could also help to create a support network. I really like having a close research team because I think the students can help each other, and you know, if something's bothering one, it's, I think, more comfortable for them to approach peers as opposed to approaching their advisor who they think may judge them or whatever. So try to have a support network. Maybe that's your significant other, maybe it's friends, maybe it's peers that you work with, but have that support network because I guarantee there's others feeling the exact same way you are. I also recommend get a hobby. If all you do is your research, I think you're headed towards burnout. And if nothing else, you're going to be less creative. Do something on the side. I've seen students who do music. When I was in graduate school, it was skydiving and scuba diving. That was my hobby. I think the more different your hobby is than your research, probably the better, but definitely get a hobby and take breaks, and that will lower your stress. Otherwise, if you're really having a hard time with stress, go see your university's counseling center. There's lots of really good and effective ways to deal with the stress. So I will end with some of my wisest advice, if I can offer wise advice. This is the wisest that I have. You're going to have a lot of frustrations and struggles in graduate school. It's not an easy time. It can't be easy. This is why not everybody earns a PhD. For me, having a sense of humor really helped. You know, we can laugh at ourselves and how tough things are and how we don't like working in the lab till 3 o'clock in the morning. And if we have a sense of humor about this, it helps us get through it. I keep mentioning this, and this is super important. Take breaks. And I see lots of students, they're going strong and they're not taking breaks because they still feel pretty good. You don't want to wait until you're breaking down to take the break. So make yourself some kind of schedule. Maybe you're going to work an hour, walk around 10 minutes. And then you do that 3 or 4 times, and then you do a longer walk or go eat your lunch, and come up with a schedule where you're not working just for long stretches of time without a break. Take your weekends off whenever possible. Don't work through your weekends. Now, maybe you have a deadline and it's a temporary thing. You're going to work through just one weekend. But if that starts becoming a pattern, I think it's only a matter of time before that starts affecting your mental health. The other thing is enjoy the journey. Don't be in a rush to finish. A lot of people say their graduate years are some of the best times of their life. And very often we're in such a rush to get a job because, then we'll have a PhD. People are going to call me doctor. I'm going to have a job. But you know what? You're also going to have a set schedule. You're probably going to be less intellectually free. You're going to have to start paying more bills. And, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And I think in hindsight, everybody remembers their graduate years more fondly than their working years. So don't be in a rush to finish. And I'm not saying to stretch a 4-year PhD out to 10 years by any regards. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying enjoy the journey. You want to have a very good relationship with your advisor and keep talking with them. I think it's important to have a frequent talk with your advisor, and it's not possible to do this until, I don't know, maybe halfway through, but you have to have a sit down and make sure you have a very specific list of everything that you need to accomplish in order to graduate. And that list needs to be very clear and specific. And I think just as important to talk about what you're not going to do as what it is going to do. So if you accomplish everything on that list, you can graduate. And having that list gives you a goal. Without that list, your advisor can keep you going indefinitely. Now, if you make a discovery, if your research changes directions, that's okay. Just go back and have that meeting again. But have that meeting, and with those specific goals in mind, I think that will help lower your stress, anxiety. It will make your future more clear, give you a better sense of control. The other thing is, it's a mistake to rely on your advisor too much. There's a reason that he's called your advisor and not your everyday boss. He or she is just there for advice. Really, your degree and everything that's happening there is up to you. So don't necessarily rely on your advisor to lay out every little step of how you're going to accomplish things. If nothing else, you're not really practicing to become an independent researcher. I know when students are about near graduating because I can hand them some super crazy, ridiculous task that's super hard. Hey, make this twisted time traveling machine. And I don't have to say anything else. They just go get it done. Now, they may talk to me and I'm a little bit of a sounding board. I'm more of a collaborator or partner than I am a boss or mentor that's telling them how to do that. So try not to rely on your advisor too much of how you get things accomplished. Now, in the beginning, you'll need that. I think a lot of students in the beginning don't really know how to do research. They don't know how to break things down into smaller steps. And definitely ask your advisor then how, but whenever you can and as soon as you can, try to think through all this stuff on your own. Conclusion about everything we talked about here, and it was all about these psychological things that most graduate students go through. You're not alone, and what you're feeling is very, very likely not unique. And I think going through these things is much more the norm than the exception. And seek help if you need it. In the United States here, there's a little bit of a stigma to go seek psychological help, and I'm not honestly sure the origin of that. Maybe there's some videos out there on this, but I do think that's a shame. We all get colds and upset stomachs and break bones, and we're not hesitant to go see a doctor with those, but when something's wrong upstairs in our brain, suddenly we get all weird about going to get help about that. I'm not really sure what it's like in your culture. I would actually like to hear about that. So if you have any comments of how seeking professional help is in your particular culture, I would really love to hear that. But no matter your culture or circumstances, seek help if you need it. A lot of what you're feeling is normal, and there's plenty good ways to deal with this stuff. And you're going to be much happier and much more successful as a result of it. I work at the University of Texas, El Paso, and Here's information for my university's counseling and psychological services. Whatever university you are at, I guarantee they have a similar thing because every graduate student goes through this stuff.